His eyes slowly began to fall shut the more letters crossed through his mind. Duke's head was halfway buried in his pillow, while he laid on his belly with a thick book laying open before him. The red envelope wasn't comfortable to touch. He would have preferred holding the book, but the rough and dry texture disturbed him too much. The story written down on those 5 pages somewhere around the middle of the fairy tale collection had caught his attention. It was one of the few he had never heard of before. Maybe he wasn't the only one who skipped over the titles, which didn't immediately catch him, but having grasped the beginning of the story, he wanted to know the rest. It was the act of reading which made consuming it tiresome work. The story featured a pygmy who chases a dandelion seed which had been carried away from his grip by a powerful breeze. The pygmy then packs all of his belongings to follow after his beloved dandelion seed, but has to face trial after trial to get closer to his goal. As far as Dew had read it already, the little creature had crossed a stream of water leaking from a barrel, jumped off the cliff of a staircase, and lost his back to a slug. Now the pygmy was drifting over a puddle using a fallen leaf. Dew was about to reach out to turn over the page when his body was pushed further down into the mattress by a weight from above. "Whatcha reading?" Avery locked his arms around his neck, mildly suffocating him. "The dandelion seed. A fairy tale," he squeezed out. She got next to him and he was able to breathe freely again. "Oh, I remember that one. Mother forbade us from reading it, but Samuel bothered me until I did. We were a little disturbed by the ending. I understand why a 5-year-old shouldn't do so." "Shush, no revelations, please. I want to read it for myself," Dew quickly spoke up. She shrugged and motioned to leave again. "Then I won't disturb you any more." The book closed shut. I'm done for now. "You don't have to go," he hurriedly exclaimed while getting a grip on her white shirt, sitting up and turning to the side to fully face her. On the chair in the back he saw the blue uniform. Next to it stood her boots. She relaxed and folded her wings behind her back and stretched her arms in the air. "How was your second tournament day?" Dew tried to initiate a conversation to make up for the accidental rejection. "Better than yesterday. Nobody died or got severely injured. Patrick actually got some points today, but Martin passed out due to sun exposure." "And what about Jonah?" She nudged his arm. "Don't worry about his behavior. He kept noticeably quiet," Avery assured him, and he sighed in relief. "And," he began, but she immediately clarified, "the day wasn't all that exhausting. I didn't go blind like yesterday." Aaron placed me at the outer edge of the crowd, where there was enough shade. A small fight did break out, but we handled that well. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she affirmed with sincerity. "It was actually kind of entertaining today. I saw the ghost outside for the first time, and let me say, she was pissed. Constantly made a silent ruckus and pointed middle fingers at the judges. You'd love her attitude." A smirk was placed on her lips, and a tension he wasn't aware of before released. Leaning onto his shoulder with hand and head, she spoke directly into his ear. "And what about you? What have you been up to?" "Worrying about you?" It wasn't all that dramatic, but during his work he had kept on wondering if his partner would make it through the day after the concussion from the day before, especially around the Boer hybrid, whom he now cursed. "Well, isn't that sweet? If you want to know something else for your relief, Josephine made it back today, and I had a friendly chat with Kevin and discouraged him from becoming a knight. Now I think your female colleague wants to invite me for dinner or something. Such a sweet thing she is." With the last word she nudged her head softly against his and put the free arm around his chest. The third day of the game started with the same sunshine as the last two. Dew found himself in bed with his hand still around Avery's waist. Loosening his grip to examine his wrist, he discovered that the rope had left red marks through friction. Touching his neck, the bruising there made itself noticeable as well. She was still asleep. Dew could feel the steady movement of her ribs under his fingers as he placed them back on her hot skin. His eyes found the white cloth, which was his bandana entangled with her horns. At the attempt of secretly removing it, her upper wing twitched, and she slightly opened her eyes. "Good morning," Dew greeted while bringing the cloth into his possession. She muttered something which Dew assumed to be a reply. The blanket, which was partially covering the two of them, was taken by her while she sat up and then used to wrap herself in at waist height. Avery stretched her arms and wings and eyed him before commenting, "You look a little disheveled." "What on earth did you expect? I bet there are dents on my neck. And spots. Do you want me to cover them up, or should I help you out?" she suggested. Dew lifted his arm and looked over the dotted surface, which had gotten a lot worse since the last time he checked. "Bandages would be enough. You have those?" Avery nodded and got up, leaving the blanket behind to seek out the chest. Shortly after, she held his arm in one hand while leading the bandage through his fingers, over his palm and to the next finger, to then proceed to simply cover up his wrist and lower arm until the full length of the item was used up. The wrap was tight to reassure its lastingness, but she went a lot gentler on Dew's neck. "You have 2 noticeable spots here." She poked the Merling's head in the area close to the ear. It ruffled up his hair and put it over the spot. "Better?" "Wow," she exclaimed out of nowhere and buried her hand in the fluff. He blinked twice while staring at her and confused about what she had discovered. Then he felt a short pulling and she held something before his nose between thumb and index. "What is it?" Dew demanded, to be enlightened while squinting hard to make out what she was holding. "I guess we're matching now. You got some white hair again," Avery explained. "Oh, and perhaps you should get your hair trimmed a little." "There's no need, this is fine," he quickly replied before she could think further. Speaking of it, the moment Dew heard her say it, he felt guilt rushing over him like a wave. "Where did you put the knife?" "I gave it back to you the same day, did I not?" He blatantly lied to her face. "I wouldn't have sought out the lake if I had it." "Maybe later then? What I'm saying is, if you don't have it, neither do I." "All right, I trust you with this. Maybe Sue could lend me a pair of scissors, because I want my hair to be shorter for sure," Avery stated while brushing her long hair over her shoulder. "Why's that? I like it long, and I thought you did too," Dew protested and softly brushed over it. "It's almost at my hips and impractical." Dew pulled a whiny face, which made her giggle. Dew reached next to the bed and picked up the pile of cloth to begin dressing himself. "What I wanted to ask you yesterday, could you enjoy yourself?" he asked while pulling his shirt over his chest. Maybe. I don't really remember Avery was interrupted by a knocking. Dew quickly got himself presentable and got to the door while being careful to block the view inside the room as always. Frederick immediately shouted at him as he saw his face. "Get your ass down the kitchen, Sean overslept as well." "Sorry," Dew muttered without meaning it and slammed the door shut to get his shoes as well and brush his hair at least a little. "One more question before you leave." Dew turned towards Avery, the doorknob already in his hand. "How long do you usually stay in a room after delivering the food?" He frowned and guessed. "Maybe 10 minutes." "Shit," she cursed. "Why, what's wrong?" Avery sighed loudly and fell back into the pillow. "I guess we'll see each other at dinner." "Did you get hurt? A sunburn or—" were the first words spoken to him by Josephine. He tried to kindly smile at her, make up for his rudeness somehow, and agreed to the explanation. "Yes, that's it. I only covered my head, and someone got me an ointment, but it has to soak for a bit." Josephine nodded understandingly, and luckily didn't continue asking about the bandage on his neck. "So, are you going to the tournament today as well?" He struck up a conversation in which she gladly joined in. "Yes, Patrick was doing so well yesterday, did you know? He's an amazing duelist and almost made it to the first place." "How's he doing in today's category? What was it again?" "Archery. Oh, Patrick has a bull's eye and barely ever misses, even from 100 meters away." Sure thing, Frederick growled next to her. "And I bet he can also carry an ox with one hand." Josephine offendedly huffed. "Well, your skills with the knife are none to talk about." "I can show you exactly what I can do. See that dot on the door over there?" Dew wasn't looking, but heard Sean's high shriek a second after. The man had been sent upstairs shortly before and must have barely escaped the impalement by an overly confident cook. "In the name of Bota, Frederick, keep the knife play to Dew." "I don't trust him with my knife," Frederick whined like a child being told not to eat coal out of the oven. "Why don't you trust me with a knife?" Dew wanted to know, and looked down to his chef. "Well, let's say you're not the most present-spirited person at times." "Are you?" Dew countered. The man went silent. He decided to join Josephine to watch the games in the evening once again. Avery's unit was mostly scattered among the crowd, but Dew couldn't find her anywhere in person. Jonah was one of the only people he recognized in the tent Josephine was still allowed to watch from. "Long time no see," he greeted cheerfully and invited Dew to sit next to him. He did, not wanting to upset the man, but stayed one seat apart. "It's only been one whole day, but okay." "Where were you yesterday? I missed you." "Relaxing and practicing reading," Dew truthfully replied. Jonah laughed. "Practicing reading? What are you, 10? My bad that I didn't have the luxury of enjoying little fantasy worlds when I was living by myself in a darn lake." For the first time in several months, Dew saw the boar hybrid flustered and avoiding his gaze. "Welp," he said, "I guess reading isn't bad at all as long as those aren't boring books on how to write poems. I hated those in school." "You learned how to write poems?" "Yeah, but I never got into that shit. Would you like me to try and write you one, though?" Dew felt a little speechless at this suggestion. Why on earth would Jonah engage in something he disliked for him? "Only if you want to consider me mildly interested," he replied. The man seemed satisfied with himself as he turned back to look at the purple participant struggling to even aim the bow properly, and Dew noticed that he had barely ever seen someone do it before. Avery had tried several times during the first year of training, but settled down on the claymore because her eyes didn't allow her to see the distance clearly. "Do you know where your general is?" Dew leaned to the side to ask. "Who? Aaron? Oh, he passed out just a little after Martin. Why?" "Is this why the guarding plan has changed?" he suspected. Sue had convinced Aaron to position Avery anywhere but the dining hall, but now she still ended up there. "Yeah, it might be. Apparently the next one in line is Bobby over there, and he just randomly filled out the spots after they carried Aaron out. I'll have to spend half the night walking along the torture floor. Do you even know how bad the area smells? I can't believe Avery stays there for hours, even if not asked to. What a psycho." All right. Thanks for the answer," Dew quickly thanked before Jonah could elaborate. He knew little about what was done in those areas. It barely happened that she was being sent down there, but Dew noticed that when she did come back, her uniform was nowhere on her. She did sometimes recall her work with a tone he couldn't sort in. Maybe it was disgust or frustration, but there was a certain eerie feeling to her voice. Satisfaction. Dew wondered how Jonah felt about it. "Whatever you say. Now let me ask you something. Has Avery talked about me lately?" the hybrid asked. "Not specifically," Dew replied, surprised by the question. "Was he worrying? Did he seem a little off or anything? I'm just asking because I haven't seen him lately." "No, if you're worried about 2 days ago, that was just a stupid compilation of many factors. Just get yourself together and listen to what people tell you," he downplayed it while staring at the ground. He wasn't sure how far Jonah knew of his partner's whole situation, and he wasn't going to leak anything by accident. Jonah leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms behind his head. I try, but it's so hard sometimes, and people don't always say what they want, and he's such a liar. He learned that from me, you know. But I would say he perfected it. Enough about him. Are you free tomorrow before noon?" "So far I am." "Great, I'll get you then." It sounded like a threat. The wheels of the little wagon screeched as he pushed it over the smooth ground, which reflected the warm light coming from the candle holders, which were standing in every corner of the connected rooms. The sun didn't make it above the roof anymore, and the patio he could see through the large windows late in darkness. He didn't even need to reach the room to hear the advisor's voice loud and clear. "The performance today were terrible, but the blue and yellow one at least did it decently." "Our candidates actually triumphed way over the average aim of a casual night in this area," Dew recognized Alba's voice quietly reply. "The angle on the shot was very unfortunate. I was told he hit very close to the black." "Of course you call that good, little princess. You are too easy to impress." Duke's fingers held on tighter to the wagon and crossed through the last door. Alba counted. As I said, our candidate was way above average and proved himself to be a suited knight for guarding the city walls as well as our towers before. A servant told me, "Someone like you shouldn't engage in conversation with common people." She was harshly interrupted. "Then how else does thy majesty learn of the state of his subordinates? It is common knowledge that the nobility uses complaints as well as messengers to cull problems." The blonde servant quietly stopped the wagon and took the first 2 plates meant for the person called most important in the room. Looking to the side of the door, he tried to lock eyes with the dragon-winged knight standing patrol. She didn't reply to his gaze. Maybe she didn't even see him because her eyes had the appearance of empty glass beads focused on nothingness. He placed the plates in the right area and immediately went back to grab the rest while the advisor kept on talking. "Did you not listen? I said someone like you. You are a princess. Act like it and leave civil affairs to your future husband. I'm not married yet, which means you have not a single say." Du went around to serve Alba. She almost gazed at him and nodded as he slightly bent down as a gesture of respect. "You should be grateful for the opportunity given to you to decide on investments. Don't act like a child and spoil it all." The man continued talking, his voice as slimy as the exterior of a slug, and the urge to throw the new plate in Du's hand against his head became more and more tempting. "And so should you," Alba responded coldly at the same time as Du put the plate in place. He turned around, wanting to leave Alba to it and talk down this reasonless man. Now Avery's eyes were on him, but without any expression behind them. Du wanted to go and stand next to her until he would be called out to leave. He disliked the idea, but so far she was as composed as always. Du didn't even get halfway to the spot he was aiming at before the loud voice yelled, "Stop!" Du froze in place. His back was turned towards the table, but he could feel the eyes on him. There was the sound of heavy cloth moving as well as the small cracking of the chair, and Du saw Avery's eyes move towards the man behind him. "You there, teach the servant a little respect. 5 should be enough for today," Du heard the advisor say while Avery's eyes widened. "What did he do?" Alba accidentally squeaked. "The little fellow doesn't have the courtesy to bow before me as well, girl. Here's a little lesson for you. If your staff doesn't fear you, you better make them. Now what are you waiting for?" Du got himself out of the stupor and turned towards the man to stammer, "I have immunity against execution." The response he got was laughter. "Torture and execution are 2 different verdicts. You behind there, are you deaf or what?" She was standing in the same spot with the same look on her face, but when spoken to the second time, she shook herself and replied shakily, "No, but there is an issue. Legally, a spouse isn't allowed to harm their partner. It was due to the death of the second last queen that the rule was—" The advisor lifted his hand, wearing most of his expensive jewelry, forbidding her to speak before waving her towards him. She stiffly moved towards him without giving Du a second glance. In horror, the servant watched as the ringed fingers bore themselves into her cheeks and forced her to lean downwards. She didn't resist and kept one of her hands on her back and the other on the hilt of her sword. He forced her head to turn from left to right before shoving her back to examine her hole. "You're telling me this is a woman? The face surely is pretty ugly for one. Crooked nose, too many scars, and the eyes make me sick." Du clenched his fist while unconsciously grinding his teeth. The man leaned onto his fist without taking his eyes off Avery, whose face had gone as pale as Du's apron. "Dysfunctional, I assume," he went on and threw a glance behind her. Du's eyes darted after him, but saw the king had not even flinched at the comment. The grey-haired man was staring down at the plate before him, eating as if the proof of all of his sins weren't on his left and right side. Alba's eyes had turned into slits. Her hand holding the fork was visibly trembling. She had definitely figured it out by now. The slimy voice wouldn't shut up. "What a generally pretty complexion. Such a waste. I'd rather have a king on the throne than an immature queen and her foreign husband." Alba stood up. "I command you to keep quiet." The advisor was less than impressed by the girl than a bear being told by the queen bee to stop raiding her hive for honey, so he just went on. "Maybe still good enough to offer to guests to have their way with." "It's forbidden."
The whisper belonging to King Rufus spoke with a hint of anger. The other huffed. It would surely gain you some sympathy. A hybrid like this would sell for a farm with acre on the black market. You are aware? Just cover her face and... His knuckles were covered in fine splotches of red as he went back to build up new momentum. The blood-covered fist flew forward again, ready to knock out those teeth so the man would never speak again, but Dew was roughly pulled backwards and crashed to the floor. His lower arms were tightly secured on his back by a pair of strong hands, while a knee pressing down on him held him in place. Dew's chin throbbed with agony from the sudden fall, but he still looked upwards to the man who used a napkin to carefully dab his bleeding nose and lips as well as the vanishing chin. "Let me go," Dew choked desperately while struggling against the harsh grip, but his partner wouldn't let him. The adviser glared down at the servant on the ground as if he was an ant on a piece of lettuce. "You there on the other side, make it 15. I want to see it later." Alba's tearing up eyes stared at him in disbelief and anger, but she knew she couldn't help him. He had attempted to seriously injure an official of the kingdom and was lucky to get away with his head attached. Dew knew that, but still, if he had the chance at the very moment and could stand up, he would continue. He craved the feeling of having this man's bones break underneath his fist and hear him scream in agony, but it didn't matter how much Dew moved and cursed. Avery didn't let go. Then the other guard arrived to their side, took Dew's arms and dragged him to his feet and out of the room. Avery didn't look in his direction. She looked away. Dew got used to the smell after the first 20 minutes of silently bleeding from the deep gashes in his back, while his hands were tied together and strapped against an iron bar connected to the wall before him. His shirt was laying beside him close to the area where the knight had hung up the bloody whip. At least the man hadn't insisted for him to take off the bandages. From the start the knight had made it clear he was doing it purely out of duty. Dew had felt his fear while being restrained, and in the way the one with the torture device had hesitated after every single one of the first 5 strikes before pulling through. Dew was still biting his teeth together while the hot fluid ran down his back, while the air burned in the open skin. He didn't want to know how it looked, feeling it was almost enough to have him pass out. Maybe he would bleed out if no one would help him soon. The man had gone outside, and a replacement was soon to show up until the adviser would come down to do whatever he pleased. Dew couldn't guess what the next step would be. He leaned his head against the uneven cold wall to keep himself from passing out. He didn't want to give that asshole dissatisfaction. If it were a rope holding his hands in place, he might have used his mouth to loosen the knot and launch a surprise attack, but it was rusty metal rubbing against his already injured skin from last evening. Staring downwards, he noticed that the surface was wet and soaked into his pants because he was kneeling from the exhaustion. He desperately hoped for it to be nothing more than rainwater dripping through the small window, which had been blocked by a board, maybe to keep the light out or the sounds in. There was an ugly screeching as the door opened. Familiar steps entered his ear as a new knight entered and closed the room again. "Oh, great heavens, what in the world did you do?" Jonah exclaimed as he came closer and entered Dew's side to look him in the face. "I punched someone important," the prisoner explained weakly. Jonah elongated the chain holding Dew's hands above his head so he could relax, but even the slightest bit of movement caused pain to rush through his body. "How did that happen?" the boar asked with both interest and concern. Dew spat on the ground. "The ogre wants to force Avery to prostitute herself for anyone rich enough to be important." "Shit, they can do that?" "I don't know," he cried out. "And what did he say about that?" There was more curiosity than consent to the question. "Nothing. She even held me down when I threw my fist against his ugly nose." Jonah leaned against the wall, sank down into a sitting position and sighed. "Do you think he will agree?" he then asked. "It's funny you think he has a choice. But he's strong, you know. He could wipe out the entirety of the castle if he wanted to," Jonah argued, but Dew laughed dryly, making his whole body shake and having the agony remind him of his own miserable condition. "What, do you not believe in his strength?" the boar hybrid taunted. Avery won't. He won't do that. He won't step up for himself. If he would be so much happier, but somehow he can't. Dew shouted into Jonah's face, which was hit by drops of spit. Dew banged his own head against the wall, squinting his eyes together while his throat felt as if the belt was connected to it, closing its sling to suffocate and to kill him. "Why not?" Jonah screamed back. "I don't know. He's a mindless slave to that bastard and feels obligated to do everything he and his company tell him to do because he were to say no. I don't know what would happen. Avery is scared, he doesn't want to lose his worth, and somehow he clings so tightly to the idea that this will fulfill him. But that allows everyone to just abuse him again and again and again." Before Jonah could reply, there were footsteps coming closer. Quickly he pulled Dew into his original position and stood up, not to get either of them into trouble. Just by the heaviness of the footstep it was obvious who entered a second later. Dew stayed quiet, even though he was boiling with rage and desperation. "How gross," Dew heard a comment from behind him. The advisor must have been right behind him. "You can let him go now, I think he learned his lesson." The delighted voice spoke, and Jonah immediately moved to free him. Out of nowhere, a burning sensation traveled over his back, as if thousands of tiny fangs were clawing at his open wounds, and he screamed while his arms slumped down. The advisor laughed behind him as he twisted in uncontrollable pain, with tears streaming down his face. "Alcohol, really?" Jonah hissed through his teeth, while he used Dew's shirt to soak up the liquid from his back, while the servant's torso shook at every touch. "I will fucking kill this guy," Dew growled, with his teeth grinding and fingers clawing at the cloth of his trousers. "Dew, give me a vial of his blood when you're done." Dew huffed once more before forcing himself to ignore the stinging agony. When he tried to stand up, he almost collapsed, but Jonah supported him upwards and patted him on the bare shoulder. "I got you. Let's get you somewhere nicer," he exclaimed. Dew asked in bewilderment, "You plan on having me walk all the way up there soaked in blood?" "Of course not, idiot. Just give me a moment. I haven't done this in a while." Jonah let go of him, which almost had Dew fall down. Then he stretched his hands, cracked his neck, and reached for Dew's wrist. A wide zap later, and they stood in the corridor on the 5th floor. Holding him upward, Jonah reached for the keys and slowly opened the door. The room was empty. Dew was placed on the bed while Jonah investigated the area for bandages which weren't on Dew's person already, but it was fruitless. "Where is he?" Dew whispered, with his fingers tightly intertwined and foot repeatedly tapping on the ground. "Getting fresh air, maybe," Jonah speculated. "Let's hope that." There was an old shirt with holes which once belonged to Dew in a corner of the room, which the hybrid picked up and used to soak up the blood still streaming out of the wounds. "You're not surprised about my abilities?" Jonah then commented. "I'm too done with this shit for today, and as Avery's old acquaintance, it doesn't surprise me that you can do that as well," Dew sighed. "What do you mean, as well?" There was a tiny pink spark suddenly appearing before them, which quickly grew. Then a white light blinded them, and when it faded away there was a silhouette with pink glowing eyes standing before them. "Oh, apparently he can do that," Jonah noticed. Immediately Avery grabbed him by the shoulder and began dragging him outside, to which he didn't protest. As soon as the door was shut and they were alone, Avery positioned herself behind him on the bed and began examining the extent of the damage on Dew's back. "Shit," she muttered, and had him bent over further. He flinched as her fingers pinched at his flesh, but the pain only lasted for a short amount as a soothing, cool feeling followed the gash left by the whip. He sighed deeply in relief when the first wound out of 15 was fully healed up and Avery moved on to the next one. "What were you thinking?" she scolded coldly while her hand was halfway down the second gash. He didn't reply. "If he had insisted you would be dead," she continued. 5 strikes of mine would have been enough to split your spine in half." Dew saw the scenario before him, killed by his own partner he wanted to protect. How strange. "Were you trying to be a hero, huh?" Dew curled his lip. "Did you try to protect me?" The tone shifted in a way it could have been a mother talking to her child after it had used the expensive wedding dress to create a miserable puppet as a gift for its mother. Avery touched the next wound and it stung. "Let me tell you." Her finger traced the inside of the wound, which had him straighten up in the short moment the pain was present. "You're making it worse. You disrespect them on purpose. You make it worse." She repeated the same motion but faster. "You're speaking up against it. You make it worse." And again. "You lift your hand against it. You make it worse." Her voice grew louder with every sentence she spoke. "You didn't do anything for your own safety," Drew snapped and cried out loud. Her nails bore into the skin on his shoulders. "Because it will make it worse. Who were you doing any good? All you do is hurt people who cannot be hurt but can hurt you instead. You can die, Drew, you can die." Avery shouted into his ear, which had him shrink at the pain which seeped through her words like another fresh wound. "You sold 1 year so I can't die. What do you mean?" he choked out. "You heard what he said. Immunity against execution, not torture. Let me tell you a little story." Drew guessed only 5 wounds or so to be left open. Still, his consciousness threatened to slip away. Her voice, now at a decent volume, began to narrate. "There was this woman, 22 years old, 2 children, no husband, no parents and no friends. She went to the market and stole a cabbage because she didn't work. Labor caused her to faint easily. The stall owner noticed, reported her, and she was sent to a cell. They took her pinky. Then they let her go. A week later she stole a basket of apples. She was reported. They took her ring and middle finger. 2 days later she stole 5 pairs of chicken legs. She was reported. They took her hand. 1 day later she didn't steal any more. You know why?" He bowed his head while his vision slowly started to get blurry. "Do you know why? She bled out. She wasn't executed, just warned. Now imagine this. You go to breakfast, do your job as you did today, but don't bow. What will he do?" "Yes, he will tell them to whip you 10 times instead of 5 times. At noon he will tell them to hit you 20 times instead of 10. At dinner it will be 40 times, and if you're not dead, then you surely will be the next die. It's not an execution, it's a warning. Now what happened to the woman's children? Those who she stole for, A warm drop ran down Stu's nose, while the last reminder of his stupidity vanished. Her arms slung themselves around his torso, and her hot breath blew into his ears. They died. They died with their mother gone, who cared for them day and night, because she didn't take the opportunity to take another given to her by a rich man to be his housemaid and give her children to an orphanage. It's not ideal, but it would have been better. You want to do something good for me, right?" Her hand wandered under his chin and pushed his head backwards. "Then do me the favor and follow their commands." Her arms limply fell down, and her body, which he had felt on his moments before, slipped away. He jerked around and saw her laying there, eyes half open but with no motion in her limbs. Drew's hands reached out for hers, and when he squeezed them he expected some kind of reaction, her pulling away or returning the gesture, but there was nothing. Placing them back down, he waved before her eyes, yet they neither blinked nor moved. His throat tightened, the stream of tears thickening to take his vision. With his fingers he gently pulled her eyelid shut after feeling her heartbeat and bodily heat. His arms took her into an embrace, closed her wings so she could be turned to the side, and he silently cried into her royal blue uniform as a stream of shame from his eyes soaked in their mattress.